Live from the Script Studios, this is 10 News.
I love my brother, man. We had so many memories, together.
Moments of reflection and prayer at the first memorial service for George Floyd. Good evening. I'm Steve Atkinson.
And I'm Kimberly Hunt. The country has seen 10 days of protests and outrage since Floyd died at the hands of Minneapolis police. Today, 3 of the 4 officers involved in his death made their first court appearance. As ABC's Alex Prescia reports, it was a day filled with mixed emotions.
A powerful moment in Minneapolis. George Floyd's name ringing out as the crowd sends him on his final journey home. Today's memorial full of emotion. Hundreds wearing masks, dressed in black, socially distancing inside the auditorium at North Central University. In attendance, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Kevin Hart.
George Floyd should not be among the deceased. He did not die of common health conditions. He died of a common American criminal justice malfunction.
Reverend Al Sharpton giving the eulogy. The service, beginning around the same time, 3 of the 4 officers charged in the Floyd case were scheduled to make their first court appearance. All 4 now behind bars and facing felony counts. Thomas Lane, J. Alexander King, and Toe Tao charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder and manslaughter. State Attorney General Keith Ellison also upgrading a second-degree murder charge for Derek Chauvin. Prosecutors giving more details about what led up to Floyd's death. According to the new complaints, when officers tried to walk Floyd to the squad car, he stiffened up, fell to the ground, but said he wasn't resisting. The documents go on to state that the officers made several attempts to get Floyd into the squad car from the driver's side, and that Chauvin eventually pulled him out of the passenger side and onto the ground. The complaints also say that officers got a hobble restraint to bind Floyd's feet, but they decided not to use it and stayed on top of him instead.
The requirement is that he intended to commit an assault, and that assault resulted in the death of George Floyd.
Many see these charges as answering the calls for justice from this community.
I feel that this is going to be the time when we can finally get some justice.
The flag at City Hall is being flown at half-staff in honor of George Floyd. Now, there is a curfew in place tonight, but things have been pretty peaceful. MPD saying they only had about a dozen arrests overnight. Alex Prescia, ABC News, Minneapolis.
And protests continued across the country as demonstrators demand more change. In Lubbock, Texas, a group called 100 Black Men of West Texas organized a solidarity walk. They asked everyone to leave their signs at home and walk in silence. Things were much more vocal in New York. Protesters there chanted, "Where's our mayor?" This as police tried to enforce the curfew last night. 1 officer was stabbed while 2 others were shot while protecting a business. Meantime, in Madison, Wisconsin, law enforcement knelt peacefully with black leaders to oppose police brutality. Closer to home, a group of protesters are gathered in Chula Vista right now, making their voices heard. Let's check in with our 10 News reporter, Laura Acevedo. And Laura, these protesters are pledging to keep things peaceful tonight.
Steve, yes, this group has been here since about 2 this afternoon. They are very vocal, as you can hear. The crowd has gotten a little smaller since we last checked in with you, but they are out here. They have been chanting. This is on Eastlake Parkway next to Eastlake High School, one of the main streets here in this area. People have been honking in support as they drive by. Now, this protest was supposed to be put off until Sunday, but when the organizers saw people were out here, they told me they wanted to show up and make sure that everything remained peaceful. Now, I want to show you some video from earlier this afternoon from Sky 10 up above. Chula Vista police were out here with the protesters. They are still here, and shortly after this started, there was a moment when the protesters got down on one knee, and they tell me it was just to show solidarity with those fighting against racial injustice and police brutality. Several officers did join them by getting down on their knees.
Yeah, I think that all of the protests are supposed to be peaceful protests. No one is coming out here and telling people to be violent. No one's telling people to incite violence or break things or loot things. But obviously those things are happening to people who are not a part of this movement.
Within the last half hour, Chula Vista Police Chief Roxana Kennedy and other chiefs from the department did show up, and just moments before we went on air, there was another moment where everyone got down on their knees, including the chief. She has been here talking with the protesters, having dialogue with them. Now again, this protest has remained incredibly peaceful. People have been chanting, receiving honks from people as they drive by, and they tell me they plan on being here a couple of hours, and they will still have that protest scheduled for Sunday here at the same spot. They tell me they also want that to remain peaceful. Reporting live in Eastlake, Laura Acevedo, 10 News.
That dialogue so important. Laura, thank you. The city of Santee has extended its curfew for 2 more nights. It starts at 7 tonight, runs until Friday morning at 6. The same curfew hours are in effect from Friday night to Saturday morning as well. The curfew applies to portions of Santee east of Carlton Boulevard, west of Magnolia Avenue, and north of Highway 52. The city of La Mesa is also extending its curfews. Curfews in La Mesa will go from 7 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. every night through the morning of June the 8th.
More than 200 National Guard soldiers are standing by in San Diego County. They've been deployed after violent riots erupted over the weekend here. 10 News reporter Jennifer De La Cruz asks Sheriff Bill Gore what those soldiers will be doing that's different from police enforcement.
One of the main functions of the National Guard being here is to protect property. That's one of the reasons that we see all of these buildings boarded up at the La Mesa Civic Center. Sheriff Gore says with soldiers protecting infrastructure, other law enforcement officers can focus on other problems that pop up.
In full uniform, carrying rifles and wearing helmets, more than 200 National Guard soldiers start their new mission in San Diego County. Sheriff Bill Gore requested their help after some peaceful protests turned violent over the weekend.
The crowd, to be quite honest, overwhelmed us. We had not enough resources there, and we were in a position of defending the La Mesa Police Department, so it didn't get burned to the ground like 2 banks did.
The National Guard released this statement saying their soldiers can detain people rather than arrest them. Their role will be to assist ambulance and fire escorts, add extra security, and prevent the destruction of property. If it appears a riot or looting may start, Gore says they will not be using carotid restraints that have been recently banned by local law enforcement.
They would not be using those type of tactics. They would probably detain the person, put them in flex cups, and hold them until a peace officer got there to take custody of them and book them into jail.
Gore added they also won't be using any tear gas or rubber bullets.
Those less lethal options would be deployed by peace officers, not the National Guard.
Since this weekend, the majority of protests and demonstrations in San Diego have been peaceful. Congressional candidate Sarah Jacobs released a statement in response to bringing in the National Guard, calling the move an unnecessary escalation of tensions.
I disagree with her, and I'm the sheriff of the county, and I'll keep them here if they're needed.
Gore added he is in full support of demonstrators using their First Amendment right peacefully and hopes that is what we continue to see. Jennifer De La Cruz, 10 News.
Sheriff Gore says there is no timeline yet on how long the National Guard will be here. They are working with other law enforcement agencies to determine where they will be staged throughout the county.
The woman who was shot in the forehead by a police beanbag during Saturday's protest in La Mesa is slowly recovering. Her attorney told our 10 News reporter Jennifer Kastner that her breathing tube was removed, but the family is still desperate for details from police. A warning, you may find the video upsetting. At the family's request, we have blurred those graphic images.
The woman's attorney says she will probably be hospitalized for at least 2 more weeks because of how serious her injuries are. 5 days after this video was taken, there are still very few answers and strong emotions. 59-year-old Leslie Furcron was recording a Facebook Live. You can hear her yelling, and then the phone drops and the screen goes black.
He was struck in the forehead with a ballistic beanbag projectile.
Attorney Dante Pride says Furcron was among the thousands of people in front of the La Mesa Police Department Saturday. He says she was peacefully protesting police violence and the killing of George Floyd, when he adds it all turned to chaos and an officer fired at Furcron. Wednesday, the department said that once officers deemed the gathering to be an unlawful assembly, they began to use measures to disperse protesters, including tear gas and beanbag rounds. Furcron was placed in a medically induced coma with a breathing tube, which was just removed.
Yesterday, the surge June 3rd was the first day that they took the tube out of Miss Furcron's mouth. Now, she still is unable to speak at this point, and she did have a surgery, I believe on the 2nd, to try and repair the damage to her forehead.
It's still unknown if she'll lose an eye. Thursday afternoon, La Mesa police reported that the investigation is ongoing and there's nothing new to release. Pride says a third party should be investigating and that the officer who fired should face criminal charges if it's deemed appropriate.
There should never be a point in time where an officer should shoot a metal projectile beanbag from an elevated position down on a crowd. That is dangerous, and it can kill people, and it almost killed Miss Furcron.
And Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez is now planning to introduce new legislation related to the use of less lethal weapons on protesters. In part of a statement, she said it is past time for the state to set clear standards on how law enforcement uses these types of objects. We've got the full statement on 10news.com under this story. Jennifer Kastner, 10 News.
Now to the coronavirus here in the county. Health officials are desperately trying to remind protesters that COVID-19 is still spreading and that mass gatherings during these demonstrations increases the risk. While experts say they do recognize the right of protesters to exercise their First Amendment, they do urge people to take proper precautions. They point out that just because younger people might not show those symptoms, they can still carry the virus inside of them and spread it to more vulnerable populations.
I worry terribly about the peaceful protests. I see some wearing masks, I see some others not wearing masks. And so we are really trying to work with each of the mayors to expand testing availability.
Experts do say California is one of 16 states showing increases in COVID-19 cases, including several that have eliminated their restrictions. Here in San Diego, there are 142 new cases of coronavirus countywide. That brings the total since the start of the pandemic to 7,940. There were also 5 more deaths for that total of 288.
A promising step to get students back into classrooms. State legislators have agreed to reverse all proposed cuts in education in next year's budget. 10 News reporter Rena Nakano spoke to local educators who say federal funding is critical in order for students to safely return.
Last month, Governor Gavin Newsom said that the coronavirus pandemic resulted in a $54 billion shortfall, which included an $18 billion cut in education. But on Wednesday, Senate Pro Tem Tony Atkins announced, quote, acknowledging the strong likelihood of additional federal relief, the plan would use reserves to avoid overcutting now while still keeping reserves on hand for the future and ensuring full funding of K through 14 schools.
We are tremendously encouraged by the news that we're hearing.
But School Board Vice President Richard Barrera says that's only the first step. San Diego Unified serves its 105,000 students on a $1.3 billion annual budget. But with challenges mounted by the pandemic, Barrera says they'll need at least $200 million more to safely reopen schools.
We'll need more staff, more nursing support, more counseling support, more custodial support to clean the classrooms regularly, physical protective equipment.
With less federal funding, the longer students will have to continue distance learning. But Martin says there are other factors that contribute to a full reopening come fall.
There's a money side to it, there's a health guideline side to it, and there's personal preference side to it.
Some students with compromised immune systems will continue to require robust distance learning, but the district's goal is to return to a mostly in-person teaching curriculum.
We need our schools open. That gets the economy up and running again. It allows parents to go back to work, but more importantly, it gets the kids the education they need so there's not additional learning loss than what students have already endured because of this pandemic.
Rena Nakano, 10 News.
State legislators have until June 15th to finalize the budget proposal. And based on that, San Diego Unified School District will build its annual budget by June 30th.
We have some breaking news. A driver has been arrested for a crash that killed 4 people out for a walk in Escondido last month. The Escondido Police Department took 28-year-old Ashley Williams into custody. She's now being charged with 4 separate counts of murder and gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. 2 brothers, their grandmother, and her boyfriend, they were all killed.